I started to write L'Estrangera as an essay on my family lexicon as I was interested in rediscovering how being raised by two deaf parents affected my perception of language, of sound, of music. I wrote about music, strangely enough, for a long time in my life, but then it turned out to be a meditation on what it means to write a book about the self and write it in first person. All my life I was trying to overcome isolation that came from a very peculiar family context, class context, gender context, and so this is why I used this book, weirdly enough, as a intersectional weapon in a way. So for me, for example, if I think about my coming of age and my sentimental and political education as a young woman, often the real things that happened to me happened through films or records or books in a way. What happened, I would say, let's say Berlin by Lou Reed, right? Which is this record, very dark record about two junkies in Berlin in the late 70s. That was so fundamental to me that for a very long time I thought that was my life experience. I was not born soon enough to be in Berlin in the late 70s. I was never a junkie, but in a way, if you have to tell the story of my life, the sources of my life, that's a big source. So it's funny, when we read or write historical novels, there's always this idea that you have to bring in the sources, you know, what kind of research you did. And I have a lot of references in this book, a lot of quotes from music and records and stuff, because when you write personal histories, in a way, the story of yourself, what are the sources? And not necessarily the source is a mother, a father, or a love story. The sources often comes from the world of fiction. But I think I felt tormented as an adult when I shifted class, because I slowly fall into the middle class, and I was wondering, why do I feel this sort of melancholia? Because it builds a distance between me and my mother. Am I really out of it? Where am I? And so they often speak about trans class, so it's a transition of class. And I remember in my early days in college that I was surrounded by friends who came from well-off families that were playing the role of the poor. Again, they were performing as such. And I was not so much annoyed, because I never thought they were not allowed to do that. But I was curious, of course, about the motives. And recently I met a woman in my life that told me a very interesting story. She comes from these very established families in Rome, traditional families from, prestigious neighborhood. And she said, at 14, I realized I didn't belong there. So she was not wanting to be a tourist and, having boyfriends who were poor. She was not fetishizing poverty. But in a way, she said, I felt my consciousness was not there, so she did everything to shift class, and instead of going above, she wanted to go below. And that was one of the few cases that I ever heard of that. And of course, we can think, oh, you have the privilege to go from up to the down, you have the possibilities. It's when we talk about transitioning in terms of gender, or when people, pretend they're black. There are a lot of very, very heated, loaded questions about identity. But I think our issue with poverty is sometimes thinking that it's not allowed, if you are born in those circumstances, to have ambitions to overcome it, not in a predictable way. So what happened to me was that I was taught that I had to be a good student, a good professional, not necessarily a writer, but I wondered, what about the freedoms I would have had in imagining myself something else? Why do we have this mythology of the kids or children from the working class that have to struggle to become, productive? I think I regret and I have melancholia for all the possibilities of not becoming productive, of wasting time. And maybe in wasting time, I would have found different things for myself. So the true luxury is the possibility of making bad choices with time and money. And I think poverty is defined by the fact that you're not allowed to make bad choices, unless you're my mother, which constantly did it. And I think it was an intense process of defying codes and rules in many ways.